Hello everybody, welcome back to another video lecture. And today in this video, we are going to talk about outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics and their impacts on the human populations. So first of all, whenever we talk about diseases that could potentially lead to an outbreak or epidemic or pandemic, we're referring to diseases that are infectious or contagious. Essentially, diseases that are able to spread from person to person or from an animal to a person. So an example of an infectious disease would be Ebola virus disease. It's the largest and longest outbreak occurred in 2014 in West Africa. And symptoms include fever, muscle pain, diarrhea, vomiting, and internal bleeding. And the means of transmission was direct contact with an infected person. And there were over 30,000 cases reported, and 12,000 people died in 6 countries. So what are epidemics, outbreaks, and pandemics? Well, these are the terms that used to describe disease occurrence. So for epidemic, it's the occurrence of disease cases above the normal amount expected for a population in a defined area. An outbreak basically has the same definition as an epidemic. It's often used to refer to a limited geographic area. And as for a pandemic, it's an epidemic that has spread over several countries or continents or even around the world. So essentially, the difference among these 3 terms is on the location or like how widely spread that disease is. Usually it will start with an outbreak. Then if the disease is not contained properly, it will develop into an epidemic and further develop into a pandemic. So based on the information provided in the table, do you think the Ebola virus disease was an outbreak, epidemic, or pandemic? So please feel free to pause the video and unpause the video when you have an answer. So the answer is epidemic because the Ebola virus disease, basically there was the, again, longest and largest outbreak in West Africa, and it impacted more than 6 or around 6 countries in West Africa. So it's an epidemic. And it's not a pandemic because it's more or less contained in West Africa, that area. And it's not an outbreak because this area is much bigger than a limited geographic area, such as, for example, a school or like a little community in one of the countries in West Africa. So to test your understanding, please read the information provided here on the screen for HIV and choose an answer below. Do you think HIV was an epidemic, outbreak, or pandemic? And again, pause the video and unpause when you have an answer. So the answer is pandemic because the keyword here is worldwide spread. So it's a pandemic. Now, how about norovirus? Do you think is epidemic, outbreak, or pandemic? Well, the answer is outbreak because the norovirus was discovered and contained in Delta Secondary School. It hasn't spread to other parts of the city or other parts of the province. How about this one, E. coli bacteria? So the answer should be an outbreak because the disease is, again, contained in a defined limited demographic area. So in this case will be Walkerton, Ontario. Okay, so that's it for the epidemics and pandemics and outbreaks definition. And now let's take a look at the effects of epidemics and pandemics on human populations. So first of all, whenever we think about effects, we need to consider both the social and economic impacts. So for social impact, some examples could be, does this disease amplify the pre-existing inequalities in the society? And also, does this disease sort of promote discrimination in the society against a certain group of people? And in terms of economic impact, essentially just anything that concerns with money or the loss of money. Some examples could be, does this disease increase in unemployment rate? So a lot of people don't have a job, or a lot of people lose their job. Or does it lead to a closure of businesses? So closure of restaurants, retail stores, etc., etc. So let's take a look at some examples here. So for flu, this particular example, it gives an economic impact because it results in losses of $500 million a year to the Canadian economy. And for extra precautions due to disease outbreaks, for this particular example, it would be more like a social impact because these steps or precautions taken could lead to fear and panic. And this essentially also some extra precautions governments will take to try to contain the disease would be, for example, lockdown, which I think you should be pretty much familiar with what a lockdown is at this point. And these restrictions could potentially also have a wide social impact as well as a economic impact. So actually for this one, I will consider these extra precautions to have both social and economic impacts. So another concept here for today's lecture is different populations have different immunities. So for example, measles and smallpox, there were many outbreaks like that in Europe over hundreds of years. So over time, the populations of people in Europe built up immunity to these diseases. So, the European settlers, they brought pathogens that caused measles and smallpox to North and South America. And indigenous people living in the Americas had never been exposed to these pathogens. So a large numbers of indigenous people actually died when exposed to these pathogens. So some natural immunity, there's also some natural immunity in the human population. So for example, in remote community in the Peruvian rainforest, there's about 10% of people have natural immunity to rabies, which is fatal if untreated. And there's a small population in West Central Africa. They actually have natural immunity to Ebola. So essentially, some populations, they have natural immunity against a certain disease in the human populations, whereas some do not. So that's it for today's lecture. Please take notes again and answer the following discussion questions. And at the beginning of tomorrow's class, we are going to discuss these two questions in addition to other ones to check for your understanding. So that's it for today's lecture video. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.